From Ivan Drogo of Rocky IV to apparently every villain in James Bond movies, Russians seem to always be portrayed as so-called bad guys in American movies. Hi, I'm Joe Evers.
I'm Jen Dougherty.
And I'm Katie Duckworth. Today we'll be discussing the rise and fall of the importance of Russians in the American film industry since the Cold War.
Just after World War II, our country and the other Allied victors were taking a new approach to peace negotiations. Rather than blaming everything on the, quote, losers of the war, the Allies, principally the United States and the Soviet Union, decided to help Germany and Japan rebuild their countries.
So we had no reason to vilify the Germans or the Japanese. They're to be our new allies and dependents. Who then? The American government, media, the ultimate film industry settled on the obvious target, the Soviet Union. The other superpower of the time, the USSR split Germany and Berlin in two with the United States and even fought a proxy war in Korea just after World War II that resulted in modern configuration. Two countries, one communist and one capitalist.
Fast forward to modern day, and the Cold War has officially ended, but we still see Russians as the bad guys in films. However, they don't evoke the same fear and loathing they used to. Why? Simply put, the younger generation just doesn't fear Russians as much as the baby boomer generation does. The threat of nuclear winter doesn't loom quite as low, or at least the threat of nuclear winter started by Russia. Go back to our parents' generation, though, and you'll be met with a wall of prejudice. Perpetuated by the American media, this idea of a scary, vehemently communist, and impenetrable brick wall Russia seeped into the psyche of Cold War America.
Think the Russian hockey team in Miracle or the hijackers of Air Force One. Big, scary brick wall bad guys. These movies were huge hits. Recently, however, movies with Russian bad guys have been flopping. John Wick with Keanu Reeves, The Equalizer with Denzel Washington, and The November Man with Pierce Brosnan all have both famous and successful leading men as well as Russian bad guys, and have all failed at both the box office and critics' reviews. However, they all have one more similarity. Seeing as Russians can no longer really be used in a threat of nuclear winter situation, it would appear that Hollywood is portraying them as gangsters.
As weird as it sounds, all three of these movies are revenge rampages against Russian gangsters. Russians do make fairly good gangsters. They are confident, well-established, and fully integrated into society. But gangsters clearly don't pack the same punch as communist takeover villains. The younger generations just won't pay to watch them.
It's all very funny because Russia has recently been showing off its international power, from Putin to the invasion of Crimea. You'd think the film industry would go back to portraying them as a scary superpower, but it is sticking to comparatively small-scale villains. Putin himself seems to bask in the stereotype of overtly masculine Russian men. Nothing like a middle-aged man riding a horse shirtless to impress and stun the entire world. Nina Khrushcheva herself, the granddaughter of Nikita Khrushchev, the Soviet Union premier in charge when the Berlin Wall went up, has studied his behavior in response to the American portrayal of Russians in movies, and she noted, "He moved into that villainous image that was presented by Hollywood of Russia or Russian leaders. He watched all those movies. He was like, well, you're going to portray me as a villain anyway, so I might as well go and start biting off other parts from other countries."
So maybe we continue to portray Russians as bad guys because of Putin. Maybe it's because Russia granted Edward Snowden asylum. But maybe it's because the American film industry still can't really demonize anyone else. Muslim bad guys would tap into the inner fears of many post-9/11 Americans, but they're tricky. Made up of many nationalities and very well represented in the modern world, Muslims are harder to portray as villains without intense backlash and criticism. Notably, many Muslim Americans have spoken out about the portrayal of Muslims in the American film industry. They are always one of the three Bs: billionaires, belly dancers, or bombers. Of course, all of these depictions are horribly stereotyped and often offensive, much to the horror of the Hollywood producers.
Maybe they could use North Koreans, you wonder. However, after North Korea reacted to Seth Rogen and James Franco's comedy The Interview, it's obvious why the American film industry would want to avoid them in future films. Perhaps you could even consider China the next supply of bad guys, but think again. The American film industry would never want to offend one of its biggest markets, China, the most populated country in the world. Take, for example, the recent remake of the 1980s film Red Dawn, which changed a Chinese invasion of modern America into a North Korean invasion of America at a huge post-production cost, so as not to lose China as a market for the film.
So, like it or not, it seems like the Russian bad guys are going to be sticking around for a while. The American film industry doesn't seem to care so much about offending the Russian market, even though officials in Russia are indeed speaking out against their portrayal in our films. Batu Kasikov, a member of the Culture Committee at the upper chamber of the nation's Federal Assembly, has stated that movies where everything related to Russia is overtly demonized or shown in a primitive and silly way should be banned from theatrical distribution. Clearly, these films are definitely offending some people, but what are the poor, innocent American film industry officials supposed to do? Their hands are tied. We can only imagine what the hotshots of the American film industry are thinking, but it's probably something along the lines of, well, not all the bad guys can be aliens. Until next time, I'm Katie Duckworth.
I'm Jen Dougherty.
And I'm Joe Evers. Thanks for listening.